My husband makes $4,000 a month. I make $20,000. After we got married, he demanded we split all expenses 50-50. I agreed immediately. The next morning, he moved his parents and sister in with us. "Honey," he said, thinking it over after we came home from work. "After getting married, I think we should be a little more equitable about our finances. I know you earn a lot, but I'm a man, and I have my pride. So, starting next month, all household expenses from electricity and water to groceries and the condo's HOA fees should be split right down the middle, 50-50, just to keep things simple. Do you agree?" I sat across from Michael during our first dinner after the honeymoon, looking at the man I had just committed my life to with an expression of utter disbelief. On the table was the set of fine bone china I'd bought from Italy. We were in the 2,200 square foot penthouse apartment I had purchased on my own while I was still single, with a sweeping view of the Hudson River. Michael spoke casually as he helped himself to another piece of the Wagyu steak I had ordered for dinner. His face wore an expression of ridiculous seriousness. A man working as a mid-level technician for a modest $4,000 a month was proposing to split expenses with his wife, a marketing director whose monthly income was never less than $20,000. He called it pride. But from the perspective of someone who had navigated the corporate world for over a decade, I knew that behind those words was a cold, pragmatic calculation. Michael wanted to assert his authority as the husband, to rein in his wife's overwhelming success by imposing a financial rule he deemed fair. He either didn't know or deliberately chose to ignore that 50% of the expenses in my world sometimes amounted to half a year of his salary. I took a sip of red wine, the slightly astringent taste on my tongue sharpening my senses. I smiled, a smile my colleagues often called the death smile, right before I delivered a decisive blow in a negotiation. I nodded gently. "Fine. If you want to be proud and equitable, I fully support it. I wouldn't want you to feel overshadowed by your wife's income. Starting tomorrow, I'll send you a copy of every bill. At the end of the month, we'll add it all up and split it." Michael looked triumphant. He beamed, probably thinking he had successfully put his wife in her place right from the start. He had no idea that my nod wasn't an act of submission, but a declaration of war. I would show him just how expensive equitable can be when you're standing next to a woman in a different league. But Michael's calculations didn't stop there. The next morning, before I could even get out of bed to prepare for an important meeting at my company, the doorbell rang incessantly. I walked into the living room and nearly collapsed when I saw Michael grinning as he welcomed a group of people laden with duffel bags and shopping totes. It was my in-laws, Walter and Brenda, and Tiffany, my sister-in-law, who had just graduated from college but refused to find a job. Michael turned to me, his tone as natural as if nothing was amiss. "Oh, Catherine, Mom, Dad, and Tiffany are here to visit and will be staying with us for a while. They were bored back in Ohio, and Tiffany needs to look for a job in the city. This place is so big, it's a waste to leave the guest rooms empty. Having them here will make the house feel cozier, more alive." I stood frozen in the middle of my luxurious living room, watching Brenda casually toss a greasy takeout bag onto my imported Italian leather sofa, leaving a noticeable oil stain on the pristine cream-colored surface. Tiffany, upon entering, ran straight to the balcony, gasping in admiration before pulling out her phone to take selfies for social media, as if she were at a 5-star hotel. Without a single word of consultation with the homeowner, without any prior notice, Michael had moved his entire family in right after I agreed to the 50-50 expense policy. A detail I never saw coming was that Michael had planned this before we were even married. He had bragged to all his relatives back home that he'd married a rich woman with a big house and would bring the whole family to live in luxury after the wedding. He used the 50-50 policy as a shield. Since we were splitting the costs, he had the right to bring his family to live with us. And, of course, he assumed I would cover all the living expenses for this entire entourage under the guise of family. But Michael was wrong. He had gravely underestimated my clarity. When I got home from work, after a whirlwind day managing multi-million-dollar campaigns, I stepped into what looked like a war zone. the smell of grease and stale food hung in the air, overpowering the scent of the expensive essential oils I usually burned. Brenda was sitting in the middle of the living room, leaving a trail of potato chip crumbs on the velvet armchair. Seeing me, she barely glanced up before calling out, "Oh, you're home." Tiffany could use a hand in the kitchen with dinner. We've all been waiting for ages. I wasn't angry. On the contrary, I found it amusing. I walked into the kitchen, looked at the meager meal of a few overcooked, salty casseroles Brenda had made, then glanced at Michael, who was leisurely watching TV. I took out my phone and took a picture of the crumbs and the takeout stain on the furniture. I took a screenshot of this month's electricity bill, which had just arrived in my email. The figure had tripled because Tiffany kept the air conditioning blasting 7 inches her room. I sat down at the table and said softly, "Enjoy the meal, everyone. Oh, Michael, tonight after your parents go to bed, you and I need to discuss the expense sheet again. Since we have more people in the house, our consumption of electricity, water, and food has increased. So we need to recalculate to ensure we adhere to the spirit of equity you proposed." Michael's face stiffened, but he forced a smile. "We're all family. Why be so meticulous? It's exhausting." I smiled sweetly. "But you were the one who said it was to protect your pride as a man. I'm just helping you protect that pride." The following story may contain some fictionalized details and uses creative storytelling for entertainment and to convey strong educational messages about the value of financial independence, true self-respect, and the price of greed in a marriage. Let's follow along and see how Catherine teaches her husband with his false pride and his pragmatic family a lesson they will never forget. A war without guns, but full of intellect and costly repercussions, begins now. That night, I lay in my spacious bedroom, the sound of Tiffany's loud laughter and the blare of the TV from the living room still echoing in my ears. My penthouse, once a sanctuary of tranquility where I unwound from the pressures of managing 100 employees, now felt suffocating. The pungent smell of Brenda's greasy stew still lingered from the kitchen. It crept through the crack under the door, clinging to the expensive silk curtains I had custom ordered from overseas. I closed my eyes, trying to will myself to sleep, but a sense of bitter disappointment welled up inside me. This invasion was not just about physical space. It was a direct assault on the refined lifestyle I had worked so hard to build. The next morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. Stepping into the living room, I was met with a literal battlefield. On the polished marble coffee table, dried rings from spilled tea stained the surface. Sunflower seed shells were scattered across the floor. Tiffany was sprawled asleep on the leather sofa, her feet propped up on a hand-embroidered throw pillow. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and silently photographed the entire scene. This wasn't the act of a petty wife, but the preparation of a marketing director who believed in data and hard evidence. In the kitchen, Brenda was busy making breakfast. Seeing me, she didn't offer a single word of greeting, just casually gave an order. "Catherine, go to the store and get a few dozen eggs and some bacon. With so many people, we go through food in a flash. And tell the delivery service to bring 3 more of those big water jugs." I don't know how Tiffany showers, but she uses water like it's free. I gave her a polite smile. "Of course, Mom. When Tiffany wakes up, she can go to the market. It'll be good for her to learn the neighborhood. I have to get to work early. As for the utilities, I've already logged everything." Just then, Michael emerged from the bathroom, looking as fresh as if he'd won the lottery. He clapped me on the shoulder, his voice filled with pride. "See? Having Mom, Dad, and Tiffany here makes the house so much more cheerful. Mom's cooking smells amazing. No more takeout for dinner, huh?" I looked at Michael, my expression strangely calm. "It's cheerful, yes, but equity remains the top priority, honey. You remember our agreement from last night, right? All additional expenses are split 50/50. I've just listed the fixed and variable costs for this apartment for the upcoming month. Sit down, let's go over it." Michael hesitated, his expression shifting slightly, but he tried to maintain his composed facade. He sat at the dining table and took the paper I had just printed. I began to analyze it in the professional tone I used when presenting a multi-million-dollar project. First, the monthly HOA fee for this penthouse is $2,500. The parking garage fee for my car and your motorcycle is $800. The high-speed internet for my work and Tiffany's live streaming is $150. That's a total of $3,450 in fixed costs. Split in two, that's $1,725 for each of us. Michael swallowed hard, his voice starting to tremble. A management fee of $2,500? Back home, we only paid a couple hundred a year for the neighborhood fund. My expression didn't change. This is a luxury high-rise, Michael. It includes 24/7 security, a pool, a gym, and lobby cleaning services. Next, the variable costs. Last month's electricity bill, when it was just me, was $300. But since yesterday, Tiffany and your mom have been running 3 air conditioners day and night and using the electric stove constantly. I project this month's electricity bill will be around $900. The water bill will be about $200. Total variable costs are $1,100, which is $550 each. So, for just utilities and services, you'll need to pay me $2,275 at the end of the month. Michael's face went from pale to ashen. His salary was $4,000. After subtracting his $2,275 pride payment, he would be left with just over $1,700, and that didn't even account for groceries for 5 people, gifts for his parents, or any personal expenses. I knew Michael was beginning to feel the noose of equity tightening, but his false pride wouldn't let him back down. Brenda, standing nearby, heard the numbers and jumped. "What? You have to pay rent in your own home? Catherine, you're a director making hundreds of thousands a year. Why are you nickel and diming your own husband over the electric bill? Are you even family?" I turned to Brenda, my gaze unflinching. "Mom, this was Michael's idea. He wanted us to be equitable, so he could hold his head high and not be accused of living off his wife. I am simply respecting his wishes. If I paid for everything, people would say Michael has no backbone. I would never do that to him." Michael's face flushed with shame, and he was speechless. He looked at me, then at the bill, then at his mother's expectant face. Finally, he slammed his hand on the table, raising his voice to save face. "Fine, we'll split it. It's just a couple $1,000s. I can handle it. Just keep track of it. I'll settle up at the end of the month." I smiled. A smile full of hidden meaning. "You truly are a decisive man." "Oh, one more thing. Since Tiffany doesn't have a job yet, she will be responsible for cleaning the apartment, replacing my part-time housekeeper. I'll deduct a portion of the housekeeping fee from your contribution as payment for her work, but I require her to clean to my standards. If not, I'll have to hire someone else and add it to our shared expenses." Tiffany, who had been sleeping soundly on the couch, woke up at the mention of becoming a maid. She looked at her brother with a pout, but Michael, preoccupied with his own wallet, just grunted in agreement. That day, I went to work with a completely different mindset. I no longer felt pressured by the presence of my in-laws because I had turned them into partners in a financial contract. But I knew that with people like Brenda and Tiffany, they would never sit back and be taken advantage of. They would find other, more subtle and annoying ways to get back at me. And just as I predicted, that afternoon, while I was in a critical meeting, my phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications from the security camera system in my bedroom. I opened the app and saw a sight that made my chest tighten. Tiffany was secretly in my walk-in closet. She was holding my Hermes Birkin bag, worth over $20,000, trying it on her shoulder and posing in front of the mirror. She had no idea that bag wasn't just a material object. It was the trigger for a series of catastrophic events her family was about to face. I quietly put my phone away, my mind already calculating the value of the items in that room. This game wouldn't stop at utility bills. I wondered, when that luxury item was suddenly damaged, what would Michael use to pay his 50% of pride? I walked into the apartment around 7 p.m. just as the crimson sunset was being swallowed by the glittering lights of the Manhattan skyline. The moment I opened the door, the smell of grease from the kitchen hit me again. This time it was a pungent fish stew, so strong I had to cover my nose. In the living room, Tiffany was perched on the sofa, live streaming on her phone, selling some cheap products online, her shrill voice echoing through the penthouse. Seeing me, she quickly ended the stream, a flicker of guilt on her face, but she quickly regained her nonchalant expression. I said nothing and went straight to my bedroom to change. My eyes fell on the dark green Hermes Birkin on its shelf. From a distance, it looked fine, but as I got closer and examined it under the light, my heart skipped a beat. There was a small scratch on the bottom corner and a faint, poorly wiped lipstick smudge on the handle. I smirked. This girl had guts, but she was too clumsy to cover her tracks. I carried the bag out to the living room and placed it gently on the marble coffee table in front of the whole family. Brenda was eating dinner while watching TV, and Michael was on his laptop, probably calculating how much of his salary this month's utilities would vaporize. "Tiffany," I said in a calm voice, "did you clean my room today?" Tiffany blinked, her face a mask of innocence. "Of course, Kate. Mike told me I had to clean instead of the maid. I was very careful. I didn't miss a spot." I pointed to the lipstick smudge on the handle. "Then can you explain this lipstick mark and this scratch?" "I bought this bag in Paris. It cost over $25,000. To have this stain professionally removed and the scratch restored at a luxury goods spa, the minimum cost is $1,000. The living room fell silent. Brenda dropped her fork on the floor, and Michael shot up as if he'd been electrocuted. $1,000. That was a quarter of his monthly salary. Tiffany's face turned white as a sheet, and she stammered, "Kate, why is it so expensive? It's just a leather bag. I only touched it by accident. How can it be $1,000? Brenda started her usual song and dance. "Catherine, don't you dare try to scare her. The bag isn't even torn, and you're demanding $1,000. You're a director with money to burn. Why are you picking on your broke sister-in-law? Michael, look at how your wife is bullying your sister." Michael looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of annoyance and helplessness. He cleared his throat. "Catherine, let's not make a big deal out of nothing. Tiffany was just trying to help clean. I'll tell her to be more careful next time." I looked at Michael and gave him a razor-sharp smile. "Have you forgotten our rules? Equitable and proud. Tiffany cleans the house to offset your share of the living expenses. It's a job, and with any job comes responsibility. When you damage a partner's property, you have to compensate them. The $1,000 repair fee, in the spirit of 50 over 50, means you pay $500, and Tiffany is responsible for the other $500. If Tiffany doesn't have the money, I will record it as a debt and deduct it from her future cleaning wages." Michael gritted his teeth, his face red with humiliation. He couldn't argue because he was the one who had championed the word equitable. But $500 was a heavy burden for him right now. To deliver the final blow, I added casually, "Oh, and since everyone is here, I'd like to discuss the food budget. For the past few years, I've either eaten out or ordered high-end catering, so my stomach isn't used to the salty, greasy food your mom cooks. Starting tomorrow, I will order dinner from a 5-star restaurant for the entire family. I've already chosen the menu for the month. On average, dinner for 5 will be about $300. That's $9,000 a month for dinners, split in 2. Your share, Michael, is $4,500. Michael swayed, grabbing the back of a chair for support. $4,500 for food, plus nearly $2,300 for utilities and services, and now $500 for the bag. The total was over $7,000, almost double his monthly salary. Brenda screamed, "Are you insane, Catherine? $9,000 for food in 1 month? Are you planning to eat gold? Back home, our whole village couldn't eat that much in a year. Are you trying to kill my son?" I looked at her, my voice as cold as ice. "Mom, this is how I've eaten for years. The only difference is that I used to cover everything. Now, Michael wants to be my financial equal. I'm just helping him fulfill his wish. If he can't afford it, he just has to say so, and I'll go back to paying for everything. But if that happens, don't ever mention the words, a man's pride, in front of me again. Michael looked at me, breathing heavily. His false pride was at war with the harsh reality of his empty wallet. He couldn't say a word. He just turned and stormed into the small guest room, slamming the door behind him. Brenda and Tiffany sat there, staring at the cold, greasy stew, their faces as gloomy as a funeral procession. The following days in the penthouse were as tense as a drawn bowstring. Michael started leaving early and coming home late, his face visibly gaunt. I knew he was scrambling everywhere to maintain his facade of pride. But there was something strange. Despite his financial distress, I noticed Michael making secretive calls back home, talking to someone about an investment and a golden piece of land. On Friday evening, as I was reviewing my personal finance dashboard, I accidentally saw a strange bank statement tucked into a folder Michael had left on his desk. My eyes narrowed when I saw a suspicious transaction. $20,000 had been transferred just 2 weeks ago, right before his family arrived in New York. A man earning $4,000 a month, pinching every penny for utilities, somehow had $20,000 for a secret transaction? Where did he get that money? And who was Michael, really, behind the facade of a gentle, unassuming technician? Things were clearly not as simple as the 50/50 policy he had proposed. A shocking truth was beginning to emerge from the dark smudges on that bank statement. I stared at the $20,000 figure on the bank statement, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from a wave of disgust rising in my veins. A husband who played the victim of equity every morning, a man who constantly complained about having to tighten his belt to pay for electricity, had secretly moved a huge sum of money right before bringing his family here. I clenched the paper, feeling like I was holding evidence of a massive emotional and financial fraud. Michael wasn't poor, or at least he wasn't as broke as he was pretending to be. This realization was laughable. The 50/50 policy wasn't about protecting his pride. It was a move in his financial chess game. He wanted to tie up my money in household expenses, while his own funds were funneled to some secret destination. I quietly placed the statement back where I found it, wiped the sweat from my palms, and walked into the living room with a perfectly composed face. Saturday morning, instead of leaving early for work, I sat at the breakfast bar, sipping a cup of artisanal tea. Tiffany emerged from the bathroom wearing my new silk nightgown, one I had just bought and hadn't even removed the tags from. She casually picked up my La Mer cosmetics from my vanity, which I had left in the living room, and began slathering the cream on her arms and legs as if it were cheap drugstore lotion. I took a sip of my tea, my voice relaxed. That skincare set is for the sensitive skin on my face. It cost $900. Using it on your legs is quite a waste, Tiffany. By the way, the nightgown you're wearing is $250. If you like it, you can keep it. I'll just add the total of $1,150 to Michael's expense sheet for this month. Tiffany froze, the jar of cream nearly slipping from her hand. She looked at me with a mixture of hatred and fear. You're going to charge me for that? They're used items. Why are they so expensive? You're my sister-in-law? A few jars of cream should be nothing to you. Brenda ran out from the kitchen, still holding a greasy spatula. Catherine, can you stop? Tiffany is young. She saw something pretty and wanted to try it. You're her sister-in-law, yet every time you open your mouth it's about money and bills. Don't you have any shame? I looked at Brenda and smiled politely, but my words were sharp. Mom, it was Michael who told me our family needed to have standards and be equitable so he wouldn't be called a freeloader. If Tiffany uses my things and I don't charge for them, people will say Michael can't control his sister, that your family is taking advantage of me. I'm doing this to protect your family's reputation. Just then, Michael returned from his morning jog. Hearing the commotion, he frowned and asked what was wrong. When Tiffany tearfully recounted the story, Michael looked at me, his eyes flashing with frustration. Catherine, that's enough. I already agreed to pay for the utilities. Now, you're demanding money for every little thing? Don't you consider my sister family? I put down my teacup, my gaze locking with his, deep and challenging. If you considered me your wife, you wouldn't have brought your entire family here without asking me first. If Tiffany considered me her sister-in-law, she wouldn't have rummaged through my things and damaged my handbag. You wanted equity, I'm giving you equity. Your expenses for this month are now approaching $3,500. When do you plan on paying me? Michael was speechless, his face contorting under the financial pressure and bruised pride. He didn't know I was aware of his secret $20,000. He sat down heavily, trying to soften his tone. Honey, I'm a bit tight on cash right now. How about you let me owe you for this month? Or maybe you can cover the food for my parents, and I'll handle the utilities. I burst out laughing, a sound full of scorn. Where did your manly pride go? You told me you had self-respect. You have $20,000 to transfer, but you don't have a few thousand to provide for your own parents and sister? Michael was stunned, his face turning from red to a deathly white. He stammered, How? How did you know? I didn't answer his question. Instead, I stood up, grabbing my purse to leave. Before I walked out, I left him with a single sentence, light as a feather but heavy as lead. You should figure out how to get the money. This afternoon, the contractor is coming to do maintenance on the penthouse's window system and balcony. The cost for that will also be split. Oh, and I forgot to mention, my private investigator just sent me some very interesting information about a 5-acre plot of land back in Ohio, registered in your mother's name, purchased on the very same day you transferred that $20,000. Have a wonderful Saturday, everyone. Michael collapsed onto the sofa. Brenda and Tiffany looked at each other in confusion. They had no idea what land or what $20,000 I was talking about. The luxurious penthouse was now shrouded in a dreadful silence, punctuated only by the hum of the air conditioner and the frantic beating of a liar's heart. I walked out the door, feeling light but also bitter. It turned out I wasn't just supporting a husband. I was funding a wealth-building scheme for his entire family, paid for with my own blood, sweat, and tears. But they didn't know I was a marketer. I knew how to define my own value, and I also knew how to drive a bad partner into complete bankruptcy. As I reached the parking garage, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of Michael sitting in a small coffee shop with an unfamiliar woman. They were holding hands intimately. The photo was accompanied by a caption. Mike told me he's about to divorce you because you're too cold and only care about money. You should let him go. I looked at the picture, the smile on my lips growing even colder. This script was getting more interesting than I thought. So, it wasn't just about money, but also this cheap betrayal? I started the car, a steely resolve flashing in my eyes. In this war, I wouldn't just reclaim my money. I would make them understand the true price of betrayal and boundless greed. True financial equity is a foundation of transparency. But when it's used as a tool for exploitation and manipulation, marriage becomes a battlefield of wounds. Real self-respect is never proportional to the money in one's wallet. It lies in sincerity and how we cherish the partner who has walked with us through hardship. It's a pity that so many choose to build their well-being on the silent sacrifice of others, only to receive nothing but bankruptcy and contempt in the end. I pulled out of the garage, just as Michael's frantic calls began to flood my phone. I didn't answer. I knew the best part of the drama was yet to come, when his other secret phone would ring in the middle of the night, right inside my home. The elevator doors closed, leaving me in the quiet sanctuary of my luxury SUV, but my mind was vividly picturing the chaotic scene unfolding back in the penthouse. I could imagine Michael frantically searching for the exposed bank statement, Brenda bewildered by the sudden mention of a $20,000 piece of land, and Tiffany, surely sulking, as her dream of using luxury goods for free was shattered. I drove slowly through the vibrant New York streets, but my heart felt no joy. The feeling of being betrayed, both emotionally and financially, by the husband I once trusted, felt like ice in my veins. I looked again at the photo sent by the unknown woman. She looked young, her face radiating the triumphant air of someone who believes she has captured another woman's man. I gave a bitter laugh. The man she was worshipping was, in fact, a coward who had to scrimp and save on his share of the utility bills to feed his false pride. That evening, I returned home later than usual. Unlike previous nights, when the thick smell of cooking greeted me, the apartment was eerily silent. Michael was sitting alone in the dark living room, the only light coming from his phone screen, illuminating his gaunt face. Seeing me, he shot up, his voice trembling but trying to sound firm. "Catherine, we need to talk. Why did you hire a private investigator to follow me? Why are you meddling in my parents' land dealings back home? Do you have that little respect for me?" I calmly placed my handbag on the table, turned on a warm lamp, and looked him straight in the eye. "I'm not following you, Michael. I'm protecting my assets. You demanded a 50/50 split of living expenses, while secretly taking $20,000 from our joint savings account to buy land in your mother's name. Where is the equity in that? In this picture," I held up my phone screen in front of him. "How do you explain telling someone you're divorcing me because I'm cold?" Michael froze. His pupils dilated in horror. He stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence, his usual composed demeanor completely gone. Just then, Brenda emerged from her room. Her face no longer held its usual domineering expression. Instead, it was plastered with a sickeningly fake smile. She came over, took my hand, her voice as sweet as honey. "Catherine, dear, I heard everything from Michael. Every couple has their disagreements. Don't pay attention to those rumors. Michael might have been a little foolish, but he's still your husband. I was thinking, now that the house is so full, the expenses are too high. Michael can't handle it, and that's why he's been so stressed. How about, from next month on, you give me your salary to manage? I'm an older woman. I know how to be frugal. I'll hold on to it for the both of you, so you can save for your future children. That way, it's more affectionate, and you won't have to worry about splitting everything 50/50. I looked at Brenda, feeling that the shamelessness of this family had reached a new peak. After being caught cheating and stealing, their next move was to use the keeper of the keys ploy to legitimize their takeover of my $20,000 monthly income. I gently pulled my hand away, the smile on my face as sharp as a razor. "You want to manage my money, Mom? Fine. But first, you and Michael should take a look at this." I went to my home office and retrieved a notarized document from before our wedding. I placed it on the table, my voice clear and firm. "This is a premarital asset agreement. It clearly states that this penthouse is legally owned by my mother. I am merely the resident and caretaker. All of my income from my company is my separate property, over which I have absolute control." Michael signed this as a witness. "This means, legally, your family is staying as guests in my mother's house. And if you want to manage money, Mom, you only have the right to manage Michael's $4,000 salary. My money has nothing to do with this household." The room felt as if it had been plunged into an ice pit. Brenda's jaw dropped, the agreement trembling in her hands. Tiffany, who had been eavesdropping from her room, let out an audible gasp. Michael looked at me, his eyes filled with hatred and despair. He realized that from the very beginning, I had seen through their greedy intentions and had set up an impenetrable legal fortress. You planned this even before we got married?" Michael roared, humiliation causing him to lose control. "I wasn't planning, Michael. I was being smart," I retorted, without a hint of mercy. "Marriage is a partnership, not an invasion. You people came here, trampled on my living space, siphoned my money, and now you want to take away my freedom? Dream on." I turned and walked to my room, leaving the three of them standing amidst the ruins of their vile schemes. At that moment, disgust had completely overshadowed any pain I felt. I realized that some people, even if you give them the world, will still resent you for not handing them the key to lock it up according to their will. True equity must originate from honesty. If one party uses it as a mask for greed, then ending up with nothing is the inevitable outcome. A marriage is never a place to nurture cheap calculations, and a woman's kindness is not an infinite gift for others to exploit. The true human value of life lies in our ability to stand on our own 2 feet, and appreciate the contributions of others, rather than seeking to possess them. That night, I couldn't sleep. As the clock struck 1 a.m., I heard Michael's phone ring in the silent living room. He was whispering to someone, his voice filled with panic. What? 80,000? Why so much? I already gave you the 20,000. You said the platform was safe. I narrowed my eyes in the darkness. A new piece of the puzzle emerged. The land in Ohio wasn't the only place my money had gone. Michael was mired in something much deeper, far more terrifying than I had imagined. Michael's whispers in the dark sent a chill down my spine, but they didn't frighten me. They only made me laugh at the so-called manly pride he so often preached. $80,000. For someone with a $4,000 salary, that was an impossible sum, unless he had gotten himself involved in some high-stakes gambling or a financial trap, likely led by his little mistress. I lay still, holding my breath, listening to the fragmented argument over the phone. Michael's voice began to break, punctuated by the choked sobs of despair. Don't say that. I've already invested everything I had. The land in my mom's name, that was my wife's money too. If she finds out, I'm finished. I quietly turned over, a contemptuous smile on my lips. So, the $20,000 property was just another chip he threw into whatever virtual trading platform he was worshipping. A technician who dreamed of getting rich quick by using his wife's hard-earned money to chase an illusion. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was as heavy as lead. Michael came to the breakfast table with dark, sunken eyes from a sleepless night. He no longer dared to look me in the eye. Brenda and Tiffany, however, were as oblivious as ever, unaware of the storm about to crash down on their son. Tiffany shot me a dirty look as I leisurely sipped my premium coffee, then resentfully started pushing a mop around like a broken machine. I placed the second week's expense report on the table. The sound of paper hitting marble was sharp and final. Michael, here is this week's summary. The air conditioner in your parents' room broke down from being overused by Tiffany. I had a professional repairman come. The cost to replace the parts was $700. According to our equity rule, your share is $350. Added to the dinner and management fees, you need to transfer a total of $1,500 to me by the end of today. Michael looked at the number on the paper, his hands trembling. He put down the piece of toast he was eating, his voice hoarse. Catherine, can you cut me some slack? The company is late with my paycheck this month. Late with your paycheck? I raised an eyebrow, my surprise dripping with sarcasm. A large corporation like yours is late with salaries? Or has your salary already evaporated into that $80,000 investment you were talking about last night? Michael froze. The fork in his hand clattered onto his plate, making a shrill noise. He looked at me with sheer panic, his mouth opening and closing but no words coming out. Seeing her son cornered, Brenda jumped in to defend him. Catherine, lose that sarcastic tone. Your husband is going through a hard time. If you won't help him, at least don't bring up some nonsense about money. What $80,000? Michael is as gentle as they come. Where would he get that kind of money for you to make up stories? I calmly opened my laptop and turned the screen towards the family. On it was the evidence my private investigator had sent me this morning. Text messages between Michael and his mistress, a woman named Jessica. It turned out Jessica wasn't just the other woman. She was a professional recruiter for an illegal cryptocurrency trading platform. She had whispered sweet nothings in Michael's ear, promising that if he invested an initial $20,000, the platform would automatically multiply his account tenfold. To maintain his pride in front of me, Michael had secretly withdrawn all our joint savings and even taken out a $60,000 high-interest loan from loan sharks, hoping to change his life. The result: the platform crashed, the mistress vanished, leaving Michael with an $80,000 debt and loan sharks aggressively demanding payment. Take a good look, Mom, I said, my voice calm but firm. Your son isn't as innocent as you think. He used my money to support his mistress, then used his manly pride to force me to split living costs. His goal was for me to cover all the household and food expenses, while he took his own money and burned it on this. Brenda stared at the incriminating text messages and the debt figures displayed on the screen. She was so shocked she had to grip the table to keep from collapsing. Tiffany's face was drained of all color. Her dreams of her brother buying her a luxury car and a fancy apartment vanished into thin air. At this point, Michael seemed to have nothing left to lose. He screamed in bitter frustration. "Yes, I did it, because you're too successful. Because you're too rich. I always felt humiliated. I just wanted to have a lot of money so I could stand in front of you without bowing my head. But I was scammed. I lost everything. Catherine, you're so rich. Just pay the $80,000 to save me. I promise I'll be your slave for the rest of my life." I stood up, grabbing my designer handbag, ready for work. I looked at Michael with pity. "Your pride is worth $80,000? That's a shame. To me, it's not worth a single penny. You wanted equity, I gave you equity. And now, the price of that equity is that you have to take responsibility for your own actions. I will not spend $1 to save a greedy traitor." I walked out of the penthouse, leaving behind Brenda's wails and Michael's frantic desperation. But as I stepped into the elevator, a call came from the building's security. "Miss Catherine, there's a group of rough-looking men at the front desk demanding to come up to your apartment. They say a Mr. Michael owes them a large sum of money, and they won't leave until they speak to a family member." I gripped my phone. The feeling of satisfaction from moments ago was replaced by a cold, clear-headed realization. This storm wasn't just sweeping through my penthouse. It was dragging the dark shadows of the underworld right to my front door. In a marriage, when one person intentionally builds their pride on deceit and drains the life force of the other, the end they receive is always the most painful collapse. True equity is when two hearts look in the same direction, sharing both burdens and glories with honesty, not using it as a mask to hide bottomless greed. No matter how forgiving a woman is, she has her limits. And once trust has turned to dust, her coldness is the fairest punishment for those who do not cherish genuine affection. I pressed the button for the lobby, my eyes sharp as I watched the floor numbers change. I wasn't running away. I was going down to face reality, and to see what Michael would do when his real creditors were standing right in his building. The moment the elevator doors opened in the ground floor lobby, a palpable tension enveloped me. Amidst the opulent decor of the luxury high-rise, 3 men dressed in black, their arms covered in tattoos, were shouting at the security staff. Their presence was like a dirty ink stain on the pristine canvas I had meticulously maintained. When they saw me, one of them, a man with a long scar over his eyebrow, immediately approached. He shoved a crumpled IOU in my face and snarled, "You the wife of Mike the technician, right?" He said this place was his. Said his wife was a big shot, rolling in money. Now he's hiding upstairs, won't answer his phone. What are you going to do about this $80,000 debt? I stood my ground, my hands tightening on the straps of my purse, but my face remained the cool, collected mask of a seasoned marketing director. I glanced at the paper, and my heart hammered when I saw the signature in the co-signer section. It wasn't my signature, but it was a 90% perfect forgery. Michael, the husband I had shared my life with, had been audacious enough to forge my signature to take out a loan from sharks, turning me into a shield for his gambling addiction. I took a deep breath, my voice steady but firm. "You're mistaken. First, this penthouse is owned by my mother. Michael is only a temporary resident. Second, this loan document shows signs of a forged signature. He and I are currently in the process of separation and dividing our separate assets. You can go up there and find him. But I warn you, any act of property damage in this apartment will be immediately handled by the police, as my camera system is directly linked to the local precinct." The men exchanged glances, momentarily deterred by my firm stance. Just then, a taxi screeched to a halt at the entrance. A young woman got out, her hair a mess, her makeup smeared, and her eyes swollen from crying. It was Jessica, the woman from the photo, the mistress who had led Michael down the crypto rabbit hole. She rushed towards me, not to start a fight, but to fall to her knees. "Catherine, I'm begging you. Please save Michael. They're not just demanding money, they're threatening to hurt me too. Michael said you're very rich, that you could settle this debt with a single check. I'm pregnant with his child. Please, have a heart, for the sake of the baby." Her words were like a bomb detonating inside my soul. Pregnant? So while I was working day and night to maintain a lavish lifestyle for his entire family, he was using his 50/50 policy to save money to support another woman and create a new life. Disgust rose in my throat, and I felt sick. I looked down at Jessica, my eyes devoid of pity. "You said Michael told you I'm rich. You're right, I am. But my money isn't for backstabbers. You believed him when he said he was divorcing me because I was cold. Well, now you can have him and his $80,000 pride and raise your child. I have no obligation to pay my husband's debts, and certainly no obligation to support my husband's mistress and her child." I turned and walked towards the parking garage, ignoring Jessica's desperate cries and the loan shark's threats. Inside my car, I buried my head in the steering wheel. I couldn't cry, but my heart ached. Michael's equity, Brenda's innocence, Tiffany's naivety, it was all a perfect play to cover up a rotten core. I drove to my lawyer's office, determined to expedite the unilateral divorce proceedings and request an asset freeze on everything related to Michael. But a phone call from Tiffany made me turn the car around immediately. Her voice was strained with fear. "Kate, come back and save Mike. The debt collectors got into the apartment. They're breaking things. They dragged Mike into the bathroom. Kate!" I gripped the steering wheel, my fury reaching its peak. The belongings in that apartment represented 10 years of my youth and hard work. I wasn't going back for Michael. I was going back to end the presence of these people in my life, once and for all. When I reached the penthouse, the scene inside was worse than I could have imagined. My expensive crystal chandelier was shattered on the floor. Brenda was on the ground, clinging to the leg of a large man, weeping and begging. Michael's face was bruised, and he was being held tightly in a corner by 2 other men. Seeing me enter, a pathetic glimmer of hope flashed in Michael's eyes. "Honey, save me. Sign the deed to the land back home over to them. I promise I'll make it up to you." I looked at him, the smile on my face gone, replaced by pure ice. "That land is in your mother's name, but the money was mine. What of mine are you using to pay for your mistakes?" Betrayal isn't just when someone leaves you for another. The most painful betrayal is when they use your kindness and forgiveness as a stepping stone for their own filthy schemes. When a marriage is reduced to bills and lies, the only true equity is to give back to each other what rightfully belongs to them. I get to keep my peace of mind, and you get to keep the consequences. A person's worth is not defined by who they stand next to, but by whether they dare to take responsibility for their own life. I stopped looking at Michael and took out my phone, dialing a number I had prepared. I didn't call the police. I called the one person Michael feared most, the person who held the final key to that piece of land. The phone rang, and I saw Michael's expression shift from hope to terror when he heard the voice on the other end of the line. The phone rang, its chime echoing through the chaotic living room, a space littered with broken glass and the sound of Brenda's desperate sobs. I put the call on speaker, placing my phone on the tea-stained marble table. The voice on the other end was calm, cold, and authoritative. It was Mr. Harrison, the attorney I had secretly retained to handle the civil lawsuit for the misappropriation of marital assets. "Catherine," he said, "I'm calling to inform you that the emergency injunction to freeze the 5-acre property in Franklin County, Ohio, officially went into effect at 2 p.m. this afternoon. The complete file proving the $20,000 was transferred from your joint savings account without your consent has been accepted by the court. As of now, Brenda Miller, Mr. $20,000, Michael Miller's mother, has no legal right to perform any sale, transfer, or mortgage on this property until the case is resolved." The color drained from Michael's bruised face, leaving it a deathly, waxy white. The 2 tattooed men holding him froze. One of them scowled and leaned closer to the phone. An injunction? So, the land deed this punk promised us is now just a worthless piece of paper? I looked at the man and nodded slightly. That's correct. That land was purchased with my money. Michael secretly stole it to legitimize it as his family's private asset. I have filed a lawsuit to reclaim legal ownership. Therefore, you cannot use it to settle his debt. Hearing this, Brenda let out a shriek and collapsed. Catherine, how can you be so cruel? That's my retirement property. Are you trying to drive this entire family to its grave? Retirement property? Funded by the daughter-in-law you constantly called cold and calculating? I shot back, my voice devoid of emotion. It was your son who demanded we split every penny for electricity and food so he could save up to buy land for you. Then he took that same money and gambled it away on a scam his mistress recommended. And now you call me cruel? At that moment, an unexpected twist occurred. Tiffany, the sister-in-law who had always sided with her brother to leech off me, suddenly fell to her knees beside me, grabbing my clothes. Kate, I'm so sorry. I'll tell the truth. I was the one who introduced Jessica to Mike. Jessica promised that if Mike invested $80,000, she'd give me a $4,000 commission to buy a new car. I didn't know the platform was a scam. I just wanted the money. Michael stared at his sister, so stunned he forgot his physical pain. You sold out your own brother for $4,000, Tiffany? I brought you here to live a good life. A good life? Tiffany screamed hysterically. You were always complaining to me about how Kate looked down on you, how hard it was to pay your share of the bills. I thought you had a lot of secret money, so I just wanted a small piece. I had no idea you were just a loser who borrowed from loan sharks. This raw, ugly truth was utterly repulsive. This family wasn't just rotten on the outside, it was decaying from within. Siblings betraying each other, a husband cheating on his wife, a mother-in-law condoning her son's infidelity and theft, all wrapped in a ridiculous facade of manly pride and family values. Seeing that the land was a dead end, the loan sharks grew furious. The man with the scar grabbed Michael by the collar. You hear that? Your wife won't pay, your sister sold you out, and the court has the land. What are you going to pay us with now? I'm giving you 1 hour. If you don't have the money, don't blame me for what happens to the baby in your girlfriend's belly. Jessica, the mistress cowering in the corner, burst into tears at the mention of her child. She looked from Michael to me, her eyes pleading, but I had already turned away. My compassion had been crushed under the heel of their greed and deceit. I walked into my home office, closed the door, and began to pack my important files. The sounds of destruction and despair outside seemed to recede into another world. In that moment, I realized I had been living in an illusion of compensation for too long. I thought my success could shield their incompetence, but it turned out my success was the poison that fed the insatiable greed of those who refused to work. A marriage is not a 50/50 equation of finances, but a 100% commitment to integrity. The moment you start using receipts to measure love, you are inadvertently putting a price tag on betrayal. The greatest human value of a woman is not in the money she can earn to support her in-laws, but in the courage to surgically remove the cancerous tumors that are parasitizing her life. Sometimes, the most painful equity is the one that brings freedom and peace to the soul. I grabbed my briefcase, opened the office door, and prepared to end this farce. But just as my hand touched the doorknob, a loud thud from the penthouse balcony made me jump. A figure had just climbed over the railing from the outside, and it wasn't one of the debt collectors. A startling appearance from Michael's past plunged the entire room into a state of shocked paralysis once more. The shadow landed gracefully on the floor after a leap from the balcony, dozens of stories high, startling everyone in the room. It was a woman in her late 30s, with a short, edgy haircut, but her face was gaunt, and her eyes burned with an intense, vengeful fire. She ignored the debt collectors, ignored the trembling Brenda, and walked straight towards Michael, the bruised man in the corner. I was stunned, my heart pounding. This balcony, my nightly sanctuary for watching the river and finding peace, had now become the entrance for an uninvited guest radiating hostility. The woman threw a stack of faded photographs at Michael's face, her voice hoarse with resentment. Michael, or should I say, Nathan, it's been 10 years. I've hunted for you like a rat in the sewer. Did you think changing your name and moving to New York to play the gentle, honest man would erase the blood debt you owe my child and me? Michael looked at the woman, his purple lips trembling. He mumbled a name I couldn't quite hear, but from his reaction, I knew his act as the simple technician was truly over. The woman turned to me, her eyes holding a trace of sympathy, but mostly sorrow. You must be Catherine. I've been following your story for a while. You're his fourth victim. He's not Michael Miller. His real name is Nathan Vance. 10 years ago, he used this same 50 over 50 equity scam to drain my business savings, then secretly used the money to support another woman, leaving me and my newborn baby to be thrown out on the street when the creditors came. The penthouse fell deathly silent, broken only by the heavy breathing of the debt collectors, who were now engrossed in the unfolding drama. I felt the ground beneath me give way. So, Michael wasn't just a greedy man, an unfaithful coward. He was a professional predator who targeted independent, successful, but emotionally vulnerable women to execute sophisticated financial traps. While this horrifying truth was still sinking in, Walter, my father-in-law, who had been sitting silently in an armchair this whole time, suddenly clutched his chest, let out a pained groan, and collapsed onto the floor. Brenda shrieked and rushed to him. Walter, don't leave us. Catherine, help your father. He has a heart condition. The shock must have been too much. Call an ambulance, quickly. Money doesn't matter now. We have to save him. Seeing someone faint, the debt collectors hesitated, fearing they'd get involved in a manslaughter case. The man with the scar spit on the floor. Damn it, a bunch of actors. We're leaving for today, but don't think you can hide. If you don't have the 80 grand by tomorrow, you're finished. They shuffled out. The woman from the balcony quietly walked over to me, handed me a slip of paper with a phone number, and said, If you need evidence to put him in jail for fraud and embezzlement, call me. I've waited 10 years for this day. The apartment was now left with just my in-laws and their clumsy medical emergency act. Michael crawled over, pretending to be worried about his father. Brenda clutched my hand, weeping and pleading. Catherine, your father-in-law is dying. You're a director. You have connections. Take him to a private hospital. I'm begging you, on my knees. Just advance the money, whatever it costs. We'll sell the land back home to pay you back later. I looked at Walter, who was lying there gasping, but whose eyes occasionally flickered open to gauge my reaction. The land back home? It's been frozen by the court. The $20,000? It vanished, with the crypto scam. Do they still think I'm a fool they can fleece one last time? I calmly picked up my phone, but I didn't dial 911. I called a private doctor I knew very well. Hello, doctor? I need you at my penthouse immediately. Someone requires emergency surgery. Oh, and bring the mobile payment terminal. This is a special house call, so the fee will be $50,000 for an on-site emergency. Hearing the number 50,000, Brenda froze, her sobs instantly quieting. Michael looked at me, his eyes filled with suspicion. 50,000? Why is it so expensive? We can just go to a regular hospital. I smiled, a smile that made Michael shiver. You were the one who wanted everything to be equitable, Michael. A father's life is priceless. What's 50,000 compared to your manly pride? I'll pay 25,000. You pay the other 25. 50-50, right? If you don't have the money, we can just let your father lie here and see if your pride can save him. I stood there, looking at the shattered pieces of trust scattered at my feet, feeling no sorrow. It turns out that demons don't always have fangs and claws. Sometimes, they hide behind the masks of gentle, unassuming husbands and pitifully poor families. Our kindness needs to have eyes, and our compassion is only valuable when given to those with true self-respect, not to those who see the sacrifices of others as a stepping stone for their own greed. The doctor walked in with his medical bag, but instead of checking Walter's pulse, he pulled out a strange device and pointed it at the man on the floor. Michael's face instantly changed from pale green to ashen gray as he realized it wasn't a medical instrument, but something that could expose the most terrible secret he had buried for years. A secret hidden within his own flesh and blood. The doctor I had called was actually a private forensic examiner I had been in contact with. The strange device in his hand wasn't a defibrillator but a portable biometric scanner capable of identifying fingerprints and cross-referencing criminal databases on the spot. As he approached the motionless Walter, I saw sweat pouring down Michael's or Nathan's face. He tried to step forward and intervene, but I stopped him with a single, sharp look. Let the doctor work, Michael. If anything happens to your father, your crime of obstructing medical aid will be very serious. As soon as the scanner passed over Walter's hand, a loud beep echoed through the quiet room. The examiner looked up at me and shook his head slightly. The patient's heart rate and blood pressure are perfectly stable. Excellent for his age, in fact. No signs of a heart attack or stroke. He paused, swiping on the device's screen before reading aloud. As for his identity, this man's real name is Walter Vance. He has a prior conviction for fraud and embezzlement in Arizona 10 years ago. The moment he heard the words prior conviction, Walter, the dying man, shot up like a spring, his face completely drained of color. Brenda and Tiffany were petrified. Their $50,000 medical drama had just become a pathetic, ridiculous farce. I laughed, a laugh filled with utter contempt. So the whole family is a cast of first-rate actors. The $50,000 I was willing to spend to save your father seems like too high a price for such a clumsy performance. At this point, Nathan Vance knew there was no escape. He collapsed to his knees and clutched my legs, his bruised face looking utterly pathetic. Catherine, I'm begging you. I admit I was wrong. I hid my past from you, but my love for you is real. My parents are old. They just wanted a little money for their retirement. That's why they did it. Please. Don't report us. I'll do anything to make it up to you. I pulled my leg away, looking at the man I once called my husband with indescribable disgust. Make it up to me? With what? With the $80,000 debt the loan sharks are after you for? With the child in Jessica's womb? Or with the land you secretly bought for your mother with my money? You say you love me, but you used an equitable policy to drain me of every penny for utilities so you could fund your family's dark schemes. You call that love? The truth grew even more rotten as I presented another file. It was proof that for the past 2 years, Michael hadn't worked at any engineering firm. He had been fired long ago for stealing materials. Every morning, he put on his work clothes and left, but he was actually going to meet his mistress, Jessica, a key player in the crypto scam ring. The $4,000 he claimed was his salary was actually his commission from luring other unsuspecting victims into the platform. Seeing her son completely exposed, Brenda went berserk. She lunged at me, trying to scratch me, screaming, "You vicious daughter-in-law! You think you can use your money to humiliate my family? It was your family's good fortune for 3 generations that my son married you. And now you're trying to send him to prison? I won't let you divorce him. I'll stay in this house until I die." Tiffany joined her mother. "That's right. You have no right to kick us out. This is my brother's house. He's your husband." I looked at the 3 of them, raging in my luxurious penthouse, feeling strangely calm. I picked up my phone and played an audio recording my investigator had captured in their living room back in Ohio a month ago. Nathan's voice was crystal clear. "Don't worry, Mom. I tricked her into signing a document acknowledging our joint assets. Just 1 more year, and I'll drain all the money from her company accounts. Then this house will be ours, and she'll be out on the street. Successful women like her are always foolish when it comes to love." The recording ended. A dead silence fell over the room. Nathan trembled, unable to utter a single word of defense. His shamelessness had been stripped of its final layer. I stood up, smoothed my business attire, my voice as cold as ice. "Today's party is over, but I've prepared a much bigger stage for all of you tomorrow night, on our 3rd wedding anniversary. I've invited all our relatives from back home, our friends, and my company's board of directors. You wanted to wear designer clothes and show off, didn't you? I will grant you your wish. It turns out that, in a relationship, financial equity is sometimes just an excuse to hide a monstrous inequality of character. When greed is in the blood, even the closest loved ones become tools for profit. A stable marriage is never built on calculations of profit and loss, but on a foundation of sincerity and mutual respect. Never mistake a woman's silence for foolishness, because when she has been hurt enough, her response will be the most expensive sentence a traitor will ever have to pay. I turned and walked to my bedroom, locking the door, ignoring the desperate pounding and begging from the outside. I needed to rest and prepare for the biggest performance of my life tomorrow night. But as I sat on the bed, another message arrived. This one from Hannah, the mysterious woman who had climbed onto my balcony. "Catherine, be careful. Nathan is holding one last weapon to threaten you, something that could destroy your career overnight." I narrowed my eyes at the text, my heart tightening. What weapon? Had I still underestimated the viciousness of this predator? The New York skyline was still brilliant outside, but inside my heart, a true battle for survival had just begun. Hannah's message was a bucket of ice water on the embers of my victory, a weapon that could destroy my career. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone still clutched in my hand, my mind shifting into the high gear of a crisis management expert. In my 10 years in the corporate world, I had always maintained a clean record, but I knew that in the world of public relations, half a truth, skillfully manipulated by a malicious hand, was enough to create a tsunami that could wipe out a lifetime of work. I walked to my vanity and looked at the secret drawer where I kept my work laptop. The lock was intact, but for a man who had embedded his entire family in my home for 2 years, copying data or planting a listening device in my office was entirely possible. A shiver ran down my spine. Nathan wasn't just a gold digger. He was an intelligent parasite. The next morning, our 3rd anniversary, I walked into the living room looking fresh and cheerful, as if the horrifying confrontation of the previous night had never happened. Nathan sat dejectedly, while Brenda and Tiffany were sheepishly cleaning up the mess. I placed 3 large gift boxes on the table, my voice deceptively sweet. "Today is a happy day. Let's put the past behind us. I've prepared designer outfits and accessories for the whole family. Tonight, at a 5-star hotel in Midtown, we're having a grand celebration. I want to introduce Mom, Dad, and Tiffany to all of my most important business partners." Brenda's eyes lit up, greed once again overpowering her fear. "Really, dear? You're not holding a grudge? I knew it. You're an understanding woman. No one wants to destroy their own family." Nathan looked at me, his eyes filled with suspicion, but also a glimmer of last-ditch hope. He leaned in and whispered, "Catherine, if you play your part well tonight, I'll give you back what I accidentally found on your computer. Those documents about your secret marketing campaign for a competitor? If that gets out, your directorship will be gone in a heartbeat." I paused, my heart racing, but a mysterious smile played on my lips. So that was his weapon. He had fabricated evidence that I was selling out my own company. A classic, but extremely dangerous, move. I looked him straight in the eye and whispered back, "Then you'd better hold on to it tightly tonight. Don't lose it. It's your last ticket." At 7 p.m., the ballroom of the 5-star hotel glittered under crystal chandeliers. My in-laws arrived in their expensive new clothes, trying desperately to look the part of the upper class. They had no idea that the guests seated below, from my company's board members to financial journalists, had all received a special press release from me an hour earlier. I stepped onto the stage, elegant and proud under the spotlight. The applause was thunderous. I took the microphone, my voice warm but firm. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate the 3rd wedding anniversary of myself and my husband, Michael Miller. Over the past 3 years, I have learned a great deal about love, sacrifice, and especially about financial equity. My husband always taught me that a man must have his pride, and tonight, I want to honor that pride with a very special gift." I signaled the tech crew. The massive screen behind me didn't show happy wedding photos. Instead, it displayed the complete criminal record of Nathan Vance, videos of his affair with Jessica, and most damningly, the audio recording of him plotting to steal my assets. The entire ballroom gasped. Brenda and Tiffany tried to rush the stage, but were intercepted by security. Nathan, now completely unhinged, pulled a USB drive from his pocket and screamed, "Catherine, you want to humiliate me? Then we'll go down together. This drive has the proof that you betrayed your company. You're the fraud." He jammed the USB into the event laptop in front of hundreds of people. But instead of incriminating documents, the screen displayed a different video. Footage of Nathan secretly accessing my computer and creating the forged documents himself, all captured by a tiny spy camera I had hidden in a teddy bear in my office. I stood on the stage, looking down with profound pity at the man trembling on the floor. "Nathan, did you forget who I am? I'm a marketer. My job is to shape the narrative. The documents you found were a trap I set for you to expose yourself as a corporate spy. That crime will get you a much longer sentence than fraud." Just then, Hannah emerged from backstage, accompanied by 2 police officers. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was stark and final. Nathan Vance was led away in utter disgrace, at the very party he thought would be the pinnacle of his success. Brenda and Tiffany collapsed to the floor, wailing, but no one paid them any mind. The guests looked at them with the disgust one reserves for vermin. I walked down from the stage, slipped the wedding ring off my finger, and dropped it into a glass of deep red wine. I placed the glass on the table in front of Walter, who had remained disturbingly silent throughout the ordeal. I realized that in this war, the greatest equity wasn't about returning money. It was about giving each person the price their character deserved. When a marriage is built on deceitful calculations, its collapse isn't an end but a necessary liberation to find oneself again. Kindness without wisdom is an accomplice to evil, and a woman's compassion must be protected by legal barriers and sharp-witted clarity. I turned and walked out of the ballroom. The cool New York night air felt refreshing. But as I reached the hotel entrance, my phone rang. It was a call from my mother back in Ohio. Her voice was frantic. "Catherine, come home, now. A group of strangers just broke into our house. They said they're Michael's real creditors, and they've kidnapped your brother to use as leverage against you." My heart stopped. It turned out Nathan still had one last, vicious trump card he had hidden until the very end. The phone call was like a clap of thunder, extinguishing the nascent feeling of triumph. I stood frozen in front of the 5-star hotel, the high heels that had carried me proudly across the stage, now feeling like they weighed 1,000 pounds, pinning me to the cold pavement. My younger brother, my parents' only hope back home, a gentle boy who knew nothing but his books, had become the final victim in the filthy mess Nathan had created. It seemed that when cornered, a feral animal doesn't just attack its enemy, it tries to destroy innocent lives around it. Without a second thought, I immediately called Hannah, who was still inside with the police. My voice trembled, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Hannah, help me. The loan sharks are at my mother's house. They've taken my brother. Nathan still has accomplices out there." Hannah's tone changed instantly. Through her quick explanation, I learned that Nathan didn't just owe money from the crypto scam. He was a mid-level agent for a notorious loan shark kingpin. When he was arrested, his underlings, fearing they would lose their commission, acted recklessly. But they didn't know that someone in my profession, a shaper of public opinion, always has contingency plans they could never anticipate. I immediately began coordinating with the police, starting a race against time towards the rural outskirts of Ohio. In the police car, tears streamed down my face as I imagined my elderly, frail mother trembling as thugs ransacked her small home. I hated Nathan with a fury that went bone deep. He used the words equitable to enter my life and brutality to leave it, leaving behind a trail of destruction and terror that now enveloped the people I loved most. By the time we reached the edge of my hometown, dawn was breaking. My mother's peaceful house was now surrounded by strangers. Shouts and curses echoed through the neighborhood. I jumped out of the car, ignoring the officer's warnings. In the middle of the yard, my brother was tied to a porch column, his face pale with fear. The leader, A man with a long scar across his face was holding a can of gasoline. "Your sister's rich, right? Tell her to bring the 80 grand, or I'll turn this whole house to ash." I walked into the center of the yard, my gaze so cold it could have frozen the air. "You want the money?" "The 80,000 is right here," I said, holding up my laptop and a bright red file. "But you should know, Nathan Vance has been arrested. All evidence of your syndicate, from bank account numbers to illegal transaction records. I've already sent a copy to the cybercrime division. If my brother has a single scratch on him, you won't just lose the money. You'll be joining Nathan in prison for a very long time." The thugs froze. My decisiveness and the information I held made them waver. While they hesitated, the police swarmed in, subduing the entire gang. My brother was freed, and my mother collapsed into my arms, sobbing. The long, dark night was finally over, giving way to the faint light of dawn over the quiet fields. After that, everything concluded quickly. Nathan Vance was sentenced to 18 years in prison for multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. The Ohio property was legally returned to me by the court. After the public humiliation at the hotel, Brenda and Tiffany slunk back to their hometown, met with the cold contempt of their neighbors. I heard that Tiffany, broke and suffering from a mental breakdown, now wanders the town, constantly muttering about designer handbags and penthouses. I returned to my penthouse, but this time, I didn't feel alone. I finalized the divorce, erasing Nathan's name from my life forever. I decided to sell the apartment and use the money to establish a legal aid fund for women victimized in marriage, so they wouldn't have to endure the pain and foolishness I had. Standing on the balcony, watching the Hudson River flow by, I realized that true equity in life isn't found in 50/50 splits on a bill, but in the law of cause and effect. You sow deceit, you reap humiliation. I sowed sincerity, and though I was exploited for a time, in the end, I reaped freedom and peace. A marriage without integrity is just a failed business contract, and those who intentionally drain the life force of others will sooner or later pay the price with their own honor and freedom. A woman's value is not determined by the money she earns for her husband's family, but by the courage to take a pair of scissors and cut away the parasites devouring her life so she can live a brilliant and truly independent existence. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool river breeze. The past was closed. I knew that out there, so many other women needed me to continue telling stories of awakening. A new journey was beginning, and this time, I would never again let anyone define my worth with the word "split it." But just as I was about to turn and go inside, I noticed an unstamped envelope that had been slipped under my door. Inside was a single, grainy ultrasound photo and a handwritten note. "Nathan is in prison, but this child is still a Vance. Are you really going to abandon it?" A new shadow had appeared, a final test of my compassion.